Welcome to this edition of the Head to Head Podcast. I'm your host, Cam McKinney, and this is episode 134 of the podcast. And in this edition of the podcast, I'm talking about Bucks forward Giannis Antetokounmpo signing a contract extension to stay with the Bucks. The contract for Giannis that he signed is a 5-year Supermax extension worth $228 million. Some people are surprised by this move by Giannis, others are not. I'm not really that surprised. I thought it was a long shot of him joining the Miami Heat that already has Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, Goran Dragic. That's a nice team. That's not really a team that's in need of a superstar. They just made it to the NBA Finals. And then there's that long shot of him joining the Golden State Warriors. And the only reason we felt that way is because the Warriors were so good at luring Kevin Durant to join them. So that's why we thought that that was a possibility. It wasn't based on anything real necessarily. It's also really hard to look at the Bucks and say that they've done Giannis wrong. I mean, the past 2 seasons, they won 60 games and 56 games. They've been one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference. They made it to the Eastern Conference Finals the year before last. And last year, yes, it was a disappointing loss to the Miami Heat, but they weren't bad. And they seem willing to make moves to make Giannis happy. I mean, they got Jrue Holiday, which is a major upgrade over Eric Bledsoe. The interesting thing is, will Holiday fill the void that was left by Malcolm Brogdon? That's the guy they never really replaced. Jrue Holiday is a really good two-way guard. And as we all know, they botched a sign and trade deal to acquire Bogdan Bogdanovic. So they are willing to spend money to make Giannis happy. One thing I do find interesting about this is when fans in the media praise a guy for loyalty, but I think it does come to a point where a guy becomes too loyal to a franchise. I mean, just look at Kevin Garnett with the Minnesota Timberwolves. He stayed there way too long. Now, that's not the case with Giannis. Giannis is in a way better situation with the Milwaukee Bucks than Kevin Garnett is with the T-Wolves. But the way we reward guys, the way we view them because they were loyal, I think is kind of silly at times. Sometimes in the NBA, there are star players who are in really bad situations. Look at Kevin Love with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Kevin Love is not a superstar anymore, but he is still a star player who could help a really good team on the verge of winning a championship, and he's stuck with the Cleveland Cavaliers. So that's a guy I look at and I go, wow, when that guy demands a trade, I think that that's necessary. I don't think it's a bad thing for a guy to be disloyal to a franchise that is going in the wrong direction. I think it's okay to praise loyalty, but the only reason I see this as Giannis being loyal is because the Bucks are headed in the right direction. Down the line, if the Bucks ever fall apart, I'm not going to rip Giannis for wanting to leave that organization. Right now, it's a perfect fit for Giannis. Again, they're willing to do anything to make him happy, but down the line, don't count anything out. This does not mean Giannis is going to remain a Buck forever. And the biggest problem with Giannis being a Milwaukee Buck is, like LeBron James with the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Bucks will never be able to attract superstar free agents to sign with them. They will likely have to trade for stars. No star free agent is going to choose Milwaukee as their destination. It doesn't matter that Giannis is on the team. Those type of small market teams do not attract superstar free agents, and that's the major flaw of being a Milwaukee Buck. So that's why the Bucks have a harder route to build a championship team. They can't go out like the Lakers and get a LeBron James and become instant champions. They need to build a steady organization, which for the most part they've done, but they might not be able to make that next step. And when they don't, how is Giannis going to react when he's still the sole superstar without an NBA championship? The list of teams that have won NBA championships with just one star player are kind of low. I mean, I can think of Dirk Nowitzki with the Dallas Mavericks. He was the one superstar on that Mavs team. And I can also think of Hakeem Olajuwon on the first championship of the Houston Rockets. He was the one sole superstar. But again, those are few and far between. There are not a lot of guys who can carry a team to a championship as the sole superstar. Even LeBron James has never won a championship as the one superstar on his team. He went there with that 2007 Cleveland Cavaliers team, but he lost to the San Antonio Spurs. Again, Even the best of all time cannot win a championship alone. Jordan had Pippen. At some point, Giannis is going to need more help than what he's getting right now, and it might be difficult for the Milwaukee Bucks to attract that kind of superstar help for Giannis. I mean, you do look at this Milwaukee Bucks core, and it is pretty impressive. You have Chris Middleton, who is an all-star. He's just not a superstar. Like, he is a really good shooter, and every time he seemingly plays my Boston Celtics, he lights them up. He is a really good player, but is he the type of guy who can be the second best player on a championship team? I have my doubts. And of course, they just added Drew Holiday. Again, a great two-way defender. He's a guy who I really like. And then you have Brook Lopez, this guy who has resurrected his career as a stretch big. They also have a really good coach in Mike Budenholzer. Now, I know Mike Budenholzer looks to be the type of guy who has great regular seasons, like he won 60-plus games with the Hawks and then lost in the Eastern Conference Finals. He hasn't really had that playoff success. He hasn't been able to get to the NBA Finals, but I still think he's one of the better head coaches in the league, and I'm glad that the Milwaukee Bucks have not fired him up until this point. I think he's the right head coach for them right now. Now, is he the type of guy who can win an NBA championship? I'm not so sure about that, but I do think Mike Budenholzer is capable of winning a championship. Like, not enough people seem to point out that Mike Budenholzer is the one who's gotten Giannis Antetokounmpo to become the star player we all know and love today. I mean, back when Jason Kidd had Giannis, he wasn't quite living up to that star potential, but then Budenholzer comes in and Giannis takes it to that next level. Budenholzer deserves a lot of credit for the development of Giannis as an MVP, a two-time MVP and Defensive Player of the Year. He has used him the right way. It's been really good coaching from Mike Budenholzer. It's like when Mike D'Antoni took over the Houston Rockets and brought James Harden to that next level, or when he took over the Phoenix Suns and brought Steve Nash to that next level. Budenholzer has kind of done the same for Giannis. Giannis was not that same player when Jason Kidd was his head coach, but now he's a two-time MVP and Defensive Player of the Year, and I think Budenholzer deserves a whole lot of credit for that. Again, I want to point out that this does not necessarily mean that Giannis Antetokounmpo is going to remain a Milwaukee Buck for the rest of his career. Remember when Kevin Durant just silently announced that he was going to remain a member of the OKC Thunder, and then he called out the idea of joining a super team? Like, he was against the idea of LeBron joining a super team. He was against the idea of him joining a super team, only for 5 years later to join the Golden State Warriors that had Steph Curry, Draymond Green, and Klay Thompson. He joined a super team. That's how quickly things can change. Right now, Giannis might be all in on being the sole superstar player on the Milwaukee Bucks, but if 5 years go by and the Bucks don't have a championship to show for it, is Giannis Antetokounmpo going to be happy being a member of the Milwaukee Bucks? That's how quickly things can change. It might not even take 5 years. What if 3 years from now the Milwaukee Bucks are in a dire situation and they're not as good as they are right now? What if they're a 40-win team? Is Giannis going to be happy being the best player on a Bucks team that might have to be part of a rebuild? Again, he's probably not. Things can change quickly. This does not mean that Giannis Antetokounmpo is in it for the long haul with the Milwaukee Bucks. If you want a recent example of a superstar player's relationship with a team blowing up in their face, look at James Harden. The Rockets have given James Harden everything. They brought in Dwight Howard. They brought in Chris Paul. They brought in his buddy Russell Westbrook. And now he's refusing to sign an extension for $50 million, and he wants out of the Houston Rockets. That's how quickly things can change. James Harden has been the best player on the Rockets, and they have given him everything, massive amounts of money, superstar players. But at some point, your career becomes about wanting to win a championship, and James Harden wants to win a championship, and I can't blame him for that. And at some point, if Giannis doesn't have one, he will feel the same way. I mean, Giannis recently said, "Don't call me MVP again until I win a championship." This guy's goal is winning a championship. So in 2 or 3 or 4 years and he doesn't have one, his stance on remaining with the Milwaukee Bucks might be very different, and his relationship with the organization might crumble. Because again, when a superstar player is not happy and not winning, that's what happens in this league. But I also think you have to give the Milwaukee Bucks a ton of credit for making Giannis happy happy and wanting to remain a Buck for at least the foreseeable future. Like, they've done a pretty good job. I mean, there are some recent examples where superstar players tortured their organization to get out of it. Just look at Anthony Davis and the Pelicans. That did not end well because they didn't do enough to provide talent around Anthony Davis. It was Anthony Davis and basically nothing else. They did not do a good enough job of making Anthony Davis want to remain a member of the New Orleans Pelicans. Look at Carmelo Anthony and the Denver Nuggets. That didn't end well. Again, maybe that's Melo just wanting to go to a big city, but I don't think the Denver Nuggets did enough to make Carmelo Anthony happy in being a member of the Denver Nuggets. At some point, these teams have to realize it's about pleasing your young star player to want to remain with your organization. That's why the Phoenix Suns traded for Chris Paul, because they're trying to mend that relationship with Devin Booker, that he wants to remain a Phoenix Sun for the foreseeable future. And that's what the Bucks have done with Giannis. Again, they got rid of Jason Kidd. They brought in Budenholzer. Giannis went to that next level, and now they're trying to make moves to win NBA championships. They've done everything. Again, the Malcolm Brogdon loss was a pretty big one. Like, that was dumb not to. He was a restricted free agent. There was no reason you should have lost him. Eric Bledsoe wasn't good enough. To give $70 million to Eric Bledsoe and let Malcolm Brogdon go was a massive mistake. But now they're over that. They got Drew Holiday. Another major issue with the Milwaukee Bucks is their bench. I mean, this offseason they brought in Bobby Portis. He's an okay player. Like, he can score some points. They have Dante DiVincenzo. He's okay. But I think the Milwaukee Bucks' biggest weakness is their bench, because their starters are pretty good. Now you have Drew Holiday, you have Giannis, you have Brook Lopez. They have a pretty good starting five. But once you get to that bench, their bench isn't as deep as, say, the Miami Heat. And that's why I think the Miami Heat really did beat the Milwaukee Bucks. They went deeper. They had not only Jimmy Butler and Bam, but they also had a guy like Tyler Hero come out of nowhere and shoot the lights out along with Duncan Robinson. That's what the Milwaukee Bucks need most of all. They need their role players to step up. Like, they have some nice role players, but they don't have the type of role players that have stepped up in those big time situations. Now the Miami Heat have guys like Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson who are only going to build off of their playoff performances. They're going to be a scary team. That's why the Miami Heat have a chance this season to get to the Eastern Conference Finals again, and that would be a great Eastern Conference Finals, by the way, a Heat-Bucks rematch. I also feel like that's why some people are surprised that Giannis signed this contract right now, because they didn't necessarily make those moves that puts them over the top. Like, Drew Holiday is a really good pickup. Again, he's a really good two-way defender, and he absolutely shut down the Portland Trail Blazers when they swept them in the postseason. Like, he was on fire defensively in that series, and he also put up some offensive numbers. Like, he is a really good player, and again, a huge upgrade over Eric Bledsoe, who was abysmal in the postseason. This was a good acquisition for the Milwaukee Bucks, but they didn't end up with Bogdan Bogdanović, and he ends up going to the Atlanta Hawks. Like, that's a major mistake by the Bucks. They almost got a really good shooting guard to go along with Giannis and to go along with Chris Middleton. Like, Bogdan Bogdanović might have been able to become like the sixth man with the Milwaukee Bucks. He might not have even started, but he would have been a really good complementary piece on this roster. And now there are reports that Giannis Antetokounmpo went to the Bucks and said trade for Bradley Beal, and of course they didn't do that. So the fact that Giannis still signs the $228 million makes you think that maybe this was more about the money than what we're all thinking. Maybe not a lot of guys are willing to turn down that extra $50 million as one might have thought, because again, Giannis is in that situation where he could sign this 5-year contract now, but in 3 years, if he wants out, somebody would easily trade for Giannis Antetokounmpo. So get your money now and worry about the winning later, maybe, because I don't think the Milwaukee Bucks have done enough to make it that they are the definitive favorites to come out of the Eastern Conference. I mean, now you have the Brooklyn Nets with Kyrie and Kevin Durant. Now you have the Sixers coached by Doc Rivers. They should be better. You have the Celtics. You have the Miami Heat. There is real competition within the Eastern Conference. It's not even a guarantee for the Bucks to make the Eastern Conference Finals. And I think if you rank the duos in the East, like Kevin Durant, Kyrie, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, then you have Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid, Giannis and Chris Middleton might be the last of those duos, and not a lot of people even consider them a duo because they don't consider Chris Middleton to be a star player. Listen, I think he's a really good player. He's an all-star, of course, but he's not quite on that level of those other guys. For Giannis Antetokounmpo to win a championship, he's going to need a surprise person to step up and become a role player and help him win a championship. Look at Kawhi Leonard's championship with the Toronto Raptors. He had Pascal Siakam come out of nowhere and shine. That's the type of thing that Giannis Antetokounmpo needs on the Milwaukee Bucks. He needs that second guy who can take some of the load off of him, because that's what I think Siakam did with the Raptors. He stepped up out of nowhere and they ended up winning a championship. Nobody in their right minds thought Pascal Siakam at that point was going to play like that, but Kawhi Leonard showed up there and Pascal Siakam upped his game, and the Raptors now have a ring, and Giannis is still without a ring. That's why Jimmy Butler got to the NBA Finals, because a guy like Tyler Hero stepped up out of nowhere. No one thought Tyler Hero in his first year was going to be that good in the postseason. That's what the Bucks need. The Bucks need that surprise guy who comes out of nowhere and helps Giannis get to an NBA championship. And I can't look at their roster and predict who that is, but that's what the Bucks need. Giannis needs somebody else to step up their game in the postseason, an unexpected hero, no pun intended, who helps Giannis get his first championship ring. One thing about this that I do find kind of dumb is that some people are kind of down on Giannis winning a championship as the best player on an NBA team. He's only 26 years old. He's won 2 MVPs already. And oh, by the way, he won Defensive Player of the Year. And he was the first player since Michael Jordan to do both in the same season. Like, come on. This guy is at an all-time level and he's only 26 years old. He can still improve his game. I don't know if Giannis Antetokounmpo is ever going to develop a consistent jump shot, but if he does, he's going to become even more unstoppable. And again, it's not about Giannis with him winning a championship. Like I just said, he's going to need help. Nobody does it alone. Remember that Spurs team that won the championship that had Tim Duncan and Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker? Guess who came out of nowhere and won Finals MVP? Kawhi Leonard. That's the type of thing that Giannis needs. He needs that type of player to step up and help him win a championship. Like I said, those type of guys, the Tyler Heroes, the Pascal Siakams, the Kawhi Leonards, he needs somebody else to step up. It's never going to be just about the best player on the Milwaukee Bucks. It's going to be about their role players. Maybe it's a Bobby Portis who comes out of nowhere and helps seal the deal and helps the Bucks win a championship. I have my doubts about that, and I guess a bunch of people also do, but I'm not giving up on Giannis being the best player on a championship team. I don't think he needs to go to the Miami Heat to win a championship. I don't think he needs to go to the Golden State Warriors to win a championship. I still have faith that Giannis can win a championship on the Milwaukee Bucks and be their best player. I also think that superstars sometimes, learn from their defeats. Like, he's been taken down by Kawhi Leonard. He was taken down by Jimmy Butler. If you think Giannis Antetokounmpo is one of the best players in the world, which I think he is, then I think he will learn from these defeats. Like, I think he will only get better. Like, people seem to forget, Michael Jordan took a bunch of postseason losses before he won his first championship. LeBron James took a ton of postseason losses before he won his first NBA championship. It doesn't always happen right away, and Giannis is only 26 years old. It took Hakeem Olajuwon a while to win his first championship. Not everyone is like Tim Duncan and starts winning championships early. That's not the case. They go through their postseason struggles, they go through their tough losses, and then they bounce back. And I have faith that Giannis Antetokounmpo can do that with the Milwaukee Bucks. It also just feels so much more rewarding to see a guy win a championship with the team that he went through that struggles with. Like, when Jordan finally ends up winning his championship, the fact that he did it as a Bull means a lot. And then he ends up winning, 5 more with the Chicago Bulls. So he went through those postseason struggles, and then he got a championship with the Bulls. Yes, LeBron James ended up winning a championship, but it wasn't with the Cavaliers. It wasn't as meaningful. Giannis has a chance to win a championship with the Bucks after going through these tough losses against the Raptors and against the Miami Heat. And I think it's more meaningful if he ends up winning a championship with the Milwaukee Bucks. I think it's admirable what Giannis is trying to do with the Bucks. And of course, it's really good for the NBA. It can't always be about New York, LA, Boston, Chicago, these bigger markets. Milwaukee has to matter too for this to be one of the best basketball leagues in the world. And Giannis Antetokounmpo is definitely one of the reasons it's one of the best basketball leagues in the world. Because this is a guy who was drafted the 15th pick of the first round. There's 14 teams that regret regret missing out on Giannis Antetokounmpo, and he's become a once-in-a-generational type talent, 2-time MVP, Defensive Player of the Year. So sorry if I'm not going to doubt him winning a championship with the Milwaukee Bucks, because I think it's possible, and I think he will be the best player on the Milwaukee Bucks championship team. And again, I'm rooting for it because it'd be so good for the NBA and for Giannis to go through these losses against the Raptors and the Miami Heat and to come away from it an NBA champion. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Head to Head Podcast. I'm Cam McKinney. There'll be a new episode of the podcast every Monday on Apple Podcasts and iTunes. So please rate, review, and subscribe.